Hey YouTube, today we're going to be looking at a classic revolver. And what we have here in front of us, we have a Smith and Wesson Model 29 chambered in 44 Magnum. And before we go any further, I'm going to pick this revolver up and I'm going to show you that there's nothing in it and we are safe to proceed with making this video. So this particular revolver here, I do not own. This is a friend of mine that I took his revolver and had some work done to it, and I figured I'd do a video on it while I had it here in my possession. This is a gorgeous revolver. It's a 4-inch configuration Model 29. Now, a little history about the Smith & Wesson Model 29. This is the very first 44 Magnum that was ever released. The Smith & Wesson Model 29 was introduced in 1955. That's when Smith & Wesson pretty much invented the 44 Magnum, and for many years this was deemed the most powerful handgun in the world, and it really was, up until recent times when they came out with some of these crazy larger calibers like the 500 and the 454 Gasol. But this was the most powerful handgun in the world for many years. Now this is based on Smith & Wesson's end frame, and the end frame was the largest frame that they made up until recent times when they came out with that X frame that the 500 Magnum and stuff is in. But this is a very powerful cartridge. It can be used for hunting, it can be used for a variety of things, but you are going to get a lot of muzzle flip, especially with this little 4-inch configuration. With that powerful round in it, you are going to get a lot of muzzle flip. Now, what a lot of people are going to notice right away, and I'm sure I'm going to get comments, was this is not a pre-lock revolver. This is what they called the Classic series. It was been introduced here within the past few years, and I don't know the exact years. And what Smith & Wesson did, they got a lot of slack in the early 2000s when they started adding this internal lock onto the frame here. If you can look right above the cylinder latch, you'll see there's a little hole there, and that's an internal lock, and it's a safety thing. Well, that was a political move made by Smith & Wesson, and they got a lot of slack for it. A lot of people are turned off by these, and they really shouldn't be, folks. Now, there is some few differences, and I'm going to go through a couple of the differences, and I can, and I'm not a huge fan of them, but I mean, I respect them, and I don't think they're bad guns at all. Now, the Classic series, when they first came out with the locks on them, they changed the shape of this cylinder latch right here. And that's one of the things you could look for right away when you saw them. If you didn't notice the lock right away, which I don't know how you couldn't, you would notice the shape of this cylinder latch release. Well, they went back to the old school, how they used to shape them back in the day in this Classic series, and it really doesn't really hide that lock a lot, but it just makes it look like the old type of revolver. And they did this Classic line with many of the models, like the 586 and blued 357 Magnum, the Model 19, they did a Classic version, and just several of them, and they just wanted to make the Classic line where they look like the older revolvers. Now, one thing about this Model 29 is when it came out in 1955, it was already pretty popular, but in the 70s, a movie came out called Dirty Harry, and it was a whole line of movies. Clint Eastwood played Harry Callahan, and he carried around a 6-inch version that looked very similar to this Model 29 44 Magnum, and I think he pretty much patented the phrase, the most powerful handgun in the world, and he really got these things going. They were really hot when the Dirty Harry movies came out, and you couldn't get one anywhere. All the stores were sold out of them, and you had to buy them on the secondary market, and you had to pay a very large premium for them. Well, they're still not very cheap guns, folks, and you're gonna pay a little bit for a Smith & Wesson revolver anyway. But some of the differences, that besides the lock on them, the internal parts, the hammer, the trigger, they're mold injected or MIM. And a lot of people have a lot of problems with that. But my problem with those folks is they don't even know why they have a problem with it. They just know, I don't want this gun, and they should want this gun. If they can't, if an older one is not available or it costs a little bit more, there's nothing wrong with this gun. One of the other things that they do is they have a two-piece sleeve barrel on these newer ones, and people have problems with that also. I do not know why. I've never heard of one of these barrels wearing out. I've never heard of one coming apart or anything like that. Now, this particular gun, before I sent it away, it had probably one of the worst triggers that I think I have ever seen on a revolver. And I don't want to bash my friend's gun, but it was pretty bad. And I can't believe that Smith and Wesson charges what they charge for this, and they can't clean this action up a little bit. Well, that's now changed because this action works really smooth now. It's got a really cool, smooth all the way through double action pull, and the single action is probably about 2 pounds on it. But 6-shot 44 Magnum. One of the other differences in the newer ones and the older ones is these have a frame mounted firing pin. The old ones had a firing pin that was on the hammer, and people do not like that. And I do not understand why they don't like that, because they all function the same way. A firing pin hits the primer and discharges the round in it. It doesn't matter how you do it. It's just a different way of doing it. And I think it's just Smith and Wesson people's way of complaining about something that they don't even know what they're complaining about. So one of the most famous revolvers in the world was called the Cadillac of all revolvers. It's the Colt Python, and it's always had a frame-mounted firing pin on it. So that's not even an issue with me. It has adjustable sights on it for windage and elevation. It has a red ramp up front. It has a little bit of serrations on the top to knock down the glare, and the finish on this thing is actually pretty gorgeous on it. So it's a really pretty revolver with these grips on it. They're like a rosewood colored grips, and I like it. I mean, I'm a big fan of 4-inch revolvers anyway, so a 4-inch 44 Magnum, I don't think you can go wrong. But now, are they built exactly as well on the inside and really as the old ones? In my opinion, no. But are they more than adequate? I believe so. I believe that nobody could really complain about these things. If they held one in their hands, they're not going to see any difference. They don't shoot any better or any worse than the older revolvers. But if you're a stickler and you want an older revolver, you're going to have to get one out on the secondary market, and they command a pretty high price. These aren't cheap either, but usually when you buy one of these newer ones with the internal lock on them, you can expect to pay quite a bit less than you will for an older one with the lock on it, without the lock on it. Now, if you sit there and you compare these side by side to the newer Colts that come out, if I had my choice between the two, I would probably go for the Colt, but that's just my personal preference on them. I just think Colt still builds a little bit better revolver in modern times. I'm not talking about the older ones. In modern times, if this one was sitting next to the comparable Colt Anaconda, the MSRP is not that much different on either one of them, and I think the Colt works a little smoother, it's built a little bit better, and it's finished off a little bit better and stuff like that. So I would probably choose one of those. But, the older ones, there's not that much difference in them, folks. They're just, Colt and Smith & Wesson have always been rivals when they're making their revolvers. But this is a pretty nice gun, and now that we got this action cleaned up a little bit, then it's a really good gun. It feels really well. Any of these collectors, they don't even shoot their stuff. All they want to do is sit there and put white gloves on, and they would be bothered by the fact that I've put about a zillion fingerprints on this thing since I've made this video here. But if they close their eyes, grab this gun, and work this action on it, it probably works better than every pre-lock Smith and Wesson revolver they have, because I promise you they've never opened them up and done anything to them. And Smith and Wesson has always fell behind when it comes to their action work versus like a Colt. When you get them out of the box, it just do not work as well as a Colt. But you can correct that pretty easy with the gunsmith or stuff like that. They change some springs and do some polishing on the inside of them, and they end up working pretty well. So when you add the cost of the gunsmith work and the spring kits and all that, you're still going to be around the same money as if you bought a Colt, and you'd have your Smith and Wesson and it would work just as well. But none of those folks, if you closed their eyes and said, hold your 1955 Model 29 and work the action that you've never touched, never fired or anything, and you work this one right here, this one's going to work a lot smoother, folks, because this one's had a little bit of action work done to it. But anyway, folks, do not shy away from things like this. There's nothing wrong with them. Don't let the collectors... Don't buy into the hype that the collectors want to tell you about stuff like this. They're really good guns still. They're pretty decent quality guns, and they're absolutely gorgeous. And they shoot the same as the old ones. They all do the same thing, and the objective here is for you to be happy. Do not make the internet happy. Make yourself happy. Anyway, folks, you have any questions on this? This is a Model 29-10 Classic Series. Smith & Wesson 44 Magnum 4-inch. Feel free to ask. I'm not an expert on them, but I'll figure it out if you ask me. Thank you very much for watching my video today, and you folks have a great day.